Hey there everyone, Afrodo Reviews here, bringing you another book to determine, is it worth reading of a second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pit of Mount Doom? For those of you currently watching my progress through this month, you know that I took up a reading challenge by Books of Blood called the A to Z Horror. Now, in order to properly reach my goal, though I probably won't, I downloaded a whole bunch of short story horror anthologies on Kindle Unlimited. My short story horror anthologies on the Kindle. A couple of the ones I downloaded, it was called, I'm talking about the comics from the Haunted Horror collection. I also downloaded a book called The Tavern of Terror, Volume 1, Scare Street, where most of the stories in that appear to be about haunted tales based around this one specific bar. I've only read 2, so it's the best I can give you, and the 2 I've read about, while okay, I haven't found anything really to say on them. I downloaded a sneak peek at one of Stephen King's reviews. I was trying to find the 1408 book, but unfortunately I don't own it, and I can't find it on here. But one of the ones I downloaded was called the Horror Quickies, by Volume 4, where it contains a series of short stories written by a man named Steven Hudgins. Now, this was on Kindle Unlimited, which means I could rent it out sort of like a book and, return it when I'm done reading it and stuff. And let me tell you guys, I was not prepared for what was in this horror anthology. So this short story horror anthology contains about 16 horror stories, all written by the same person, Steven Hudgins, who, based on the information provided in the author's note at the very beginning, is the owner of the Maniac on the Loose podcast. I'll put the link down below if I can find it. The anthology itself, based on the copyright, was actually only published this year. And using the information provided in word from the author, these are stories that he himself writes and then reads on his own podcast. And I want to make something clear. I have no hate for this guy. In fact, before I read these, I didn't even know he existed. I actually kind of respect him to a degree. I mean, it takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there with these stories. It's something I wish I could do more with my own stories. I do respect that he put himself out there. This is purely, anything bad I say is meant to be purely constructive rather than just mocking. As I said, this anthology has 16 short horror stories in it. Most of the stories in this aren't bad, as much as they are just kind of meh. Honestly, if I had to sum up this anthology in one sentence, it would be rejected Twilight Zone episodes. Maybe with a touch of the scary door from Futurama.
It's a river that flows in 2 directions. Make that 3. It's a magic river, that's how. And it's flowing down the Erie Canal to the scary door. That's Erie with 2 E's.
To go over what I read and to ensure complete fairness, instead of reviewing every single story within this anthology, because that would take a bit too long, I'm going to talk about it in general first, and then I'm going to talk about the best, the worst, and the weirdest story I read in this. Basically, the general is going to talk about the problem almost every single story had in general, and then I'm going to go more in detail with the other ones. Describing what it was about, what I felt worked, and what I felt didn't. And trust me, you aren't prepared for the weirdest one. I wasn't. And it's the first story in this book, so. Now, the common issues I felt that most of these stories had was, as I said, they always start off very strong, but kind of peter out unceremoniously near the end. Every concept was interesting and had me thinking, oh, okay, what's going to happen here? Only for the reveal to kind of be like, eh. It kind of felt like Hudgins felt he needed to do a big twist at the end of every single story. To the bigger the better.
What a twist!
And that doesn't always work. Sometimes you can just tell a straight scary story without the need to rely on a twist. And I'll go more into that later, but basically these twists didn't really help the story in the long run. Oftentimes they kind of made them laughable or just boring. And sometimes you felt they could just end a few paragraphs sooner. Another strange little thing, albeit far more of a nitpick, is that almost every story, opens with very clunky expositional dialogue. Now, most of the time this is done exactly like this. My name is John Doe. I am XX years old. I am a blank year-old male. Sometimes the year will be tacked on too, as well as a profession, but for the most part, that is how almost every story opens in this book. And like I said, more of a nitpick, but definitely something I noticed. I got to the point where I was kind of joking about it when I noticed that one of the stories didn't open with that. Perhaps the biggest common thread I can note in this anthology, though, is that it comes off as a tiny bit misogynistic. Now, I want to be clear. I am not accusing Steve Hudgins of being misogynistic. I am not accusing him of being sexist. I am not accusing him of hating women in general. I'm merely pointing out that this is how it came off while reading this anthology. Most of the women in these stories are selfish at best and just flat out malicious at worst. Most of the time the women are in some way enabling the evil within the story, and that's the good ones. Whereas, or they'll be killed as part of the plot, with very few being actual likable characters to boot. And you'll probably see what I mean when I talk about the top three. It's just one of those, again, I'm not accusing him of anything, but it happens so often, I don't blame anyone from getting that impression from reading this anthology. With those general complaints out of the way, let's begin. We'll start with the best. Until Death Do Us Part is honestly the best short story in this entire anthology. It's a tad bit cliche, but it has the most cohesive story with a nice touch of bittersweet irony, something you would see in a well-liked Twilight Zone episode, as a way of putting it. Well, probably not Twilight Zone, but you know what I mean. The story effectively follows a newlywed couple. One is an older rich man, and the other is a younger hot woman. Now, the story opens with the man's point of view. He very openly acknowledges that he knows his wife only married him because he's a rich guy, and he's perfectly happy with that because she's a bombshell. She's extremely hot, and he's perfectly fine. However, because he knows that she only married him for the money, he laid down strict ground rules, saying that if he ever catches her with another man, that he will kill her, and so on and so forth. All these ground rules. Now, obviously, the woman didn't take that too well, so she hit him back with other rules, saying, I ever catch you with a woman, I'll kill you too. And you kind of take it as a ha-ha-ha joking at first. But, so the story follows the husband at first. He basically talks about how much he loves how hot his wife is, because that's why he loves his wife. There's no sugarcoating. He only loves his wife because she's young and hot. However, while he's at work, his secretary, who had been in love with him for years, but she'd been working with him for 10 years and had been in love with him for a while, finally comes out and admits that to him in wake of his wedding. Kind of the green eye epiphany sort of thing. She explains to him that she's been in love with him, and then she attempts to kiss him. Despite the initial shock of being kissed suddenly, the husband shoves her off and tells her, no, I'm devoted to my wife, and she's really hot, so I'm going to stay with her. So quickly he leaves his office, goes back home to tell his wife what happened, acknowledging that he'll probably have to fire his secretary. However, when he gets there, he finds out that his wife had left her phone behind, and being the right proper paranoid husband that he is, picks it up and starts to go through it. Finding out that she's been texting some guy named Ken and setting up dinner plans with him. Now, absolutely infuriated that his wife is clearly cheating on him, he goes outside, gets an axe, and sits in a dark corner of the room till she gets home with a brand new bottle of brandy. As she's pouring a drink, he goes up behind her and kills her. Before picking up the brandy she just poured, taking a drink, and saying, till death do us part. Then we get to the woman's point of view and go back a little bit. See, it turns out that this woman openly admits that she married him for the money. It doesn't sugarcoat it. They both know that's why she married him. And because of the access to the money, she never actually plans on cheating on her husband. In fact, the story flat out implies she's asexual. Maybe aromantic on top of that. Because she flat out says, I don't really want to have sex at all. But since he has the money and he wants it, I'll give it to him. However, over the course of the day, she starts getting texts from an old friend named Ken, who, and this is quoting the book, is gay as a blade. I've never actually heard that one before. I don't know if it's bad or even if it even makes sense. Someone will have to explain to me what it means, if you understand it. So she starts setting up dinner plans and thinks, you know what, my husband would love to meet Ken. So she decides to get in her car and drive off to go meet him at his office. And comes in right about that time where his secretary comes over and plants a kiss on him. Assuming the worst, she immediately turns around and leaves, angry that her husband is clearly cheating on her with the secretary. Basically decides, I'm going to go to dinner to Ken without telling my husband. And, you know what? I'm going to kill him too. So she drives to the store, gets his favorite bottle of brandy, gets some poison, goes home, and then pours him a glass knowing he'll drink it when he gets home, and poisons it. And just before, the other part of the story happens where the husband axes her, she says to herself, till death do us part. Now, the story is definitely the best of the bunch. I like the realistic elements of the story much more than the more supernatural and fantastic things of the other stories. It's also one of the few stories that doesn't feel the need to include a
What a twist!
It's very clear that this is a story of two people's jealousy and miscommunication leading to them killing each other simply because they're selfish people like that. You probably could guess that the wife isn't cheating on him, or even if she is, you say the husband's reaction is way too severe. Just make her sign a prenup and divorce her, or something like that. Both sides have a nice touch of bittersweet irony behind them. The wife's more so than the husband's. The husband's more so than the wife's, because while the wife doesn't really do anything wrong, she does immediately resort to killing him, but it's not the point here. Both characters' motivations also very clear cut, and although this, like I said, the story is a bit cliche, I've seen this story a couple times, it still works rather well. That being said, there's obviously some mild plot holes, like why did the wife not just call her husband? She says she wants the dinners to be a surprise to him, but at the same time you could have called him and said, hey, I'm going to come pick you up and take you out to dinner. Like, okay, another plot hole. How did either of them expect to get away with the murder? It was going to be very obvious who killed them. Small things like that, in addition to neither character necessarily being likable. The wife is a bit more likable than the husband, but she also resorts to murder almost immediately. The husband is very unlikable in the sense that he flat out admits he's basically going to sniff every action that his wife is doing, and the small chance that he finds out that she's cheating on him, and he will kill her. Also, he goes above and beyond when the secretary kisses him. Beyond just denying her, he flat out starts insulting her and purposely goes out of his way to make her cry by calling her a psycho. Beep! Like I said, neither are really likable, but the story itself, again, is the most cohesive, it's the most understandable, it's got the nice touch of sweet irony behind it, things like that. All in all, I'd give this one a 6 out of 10. Now we go to the worst. Now, for the most part, I didn't hate many of these stories. As I said, most of them were just meh. There was no real painfully bad one. None of that made me really stop and say, that was bad. There were a couple here and there where I was like, really? That was kind of stupid. But, again, none were really bad. So what story was really below the others in quality? Which one deserved to serve as a testament of how bad things could get? After a lot of debate, I eventually decided that it would have to be the baby monitor horror stories. Now, this is technically 2 short stories, both following a specific theme. However, both stories are only about 2 or 3 pages long, so I don't really know what to say in regards to that. Like, I wouldn't have enough to talk about if I just talked about one, is a good way of putting it. The first one is about a man whose baby monitor begins to pick up phone calls from his neighbor's door. And he starts hearing about how the man next door is a horribly abusive husband, and how it gets more and more violent every day, and how the wife is at her wit's end to try to figure it, before eventually hearing one night that she finally snapped and killed him when he came at her with the clear intent to kill her. And he hears about how she hid it. And then at the end, he finally realizes which neighbor it is by her ordering a pizza directly to her house and noticing the small pile of dirt at the end. The second one is a little more bland. It's just some woman offers to watch her neighbor's kid while they go to go visit the grandma in the hospital. And while she's watching the neighbor's kid, and over the monitor, she keeps hearing someone sing to the child. But both times she checks, there's nothing there. Eventually, when the kid's parents return home, she tells them about this, and it's revealed that my grandma died while we were at the hospital, and that was something she always sang to the kid right before he went to sleep. And that's pretty much the basics of it. To expound upon why I felt these things were bad, simply put, these feel like they would be interesting stories if they were supposedly real. But through the veil of fiction, both of them are just boring one-offs. To expound upon why these are worth, I'll start with the first. The first had a great premise and interesting concept, but didn't really deliver on it at all. It didn't try to deliver on it. For most of the story, the woman assumes that the things she's hearing in a baby monitor are just part of her imagination or ghosts. She only realizes it's her neighbor when the neighbor calls in and orders a pizza, looking out and promising herself that she would never tell anyone about the murder. The problem with that is that it's not very it's not interesting. Our protagonist is very passive. It just happens to them, and they don't do anything to affect the story in any way. When the conclusion finally comes, it's just so that's what happened. Okay, this would have been more interesting if, say, like if she had managed to make the baby monitor two-way and was like whispering to that woman to tell her what to do. She's the reason this woman eventually decided to kill her, or was this woman's confidant, but the woman thought she was hearing things. That could have been more interesting than just the, hey, I'm hearing this and it happened. Okay, I'll never tell the cops. It's not a very interesting story. The second is definitely the most boring, though. It's just a small story about an old grandmother's ghost came back to rock her grandchild to sleep one last time. It's not even really spooky so much as it is heartwarming in hindsight. And it'd be one of those, maybe if this was a real story, it would be kind of interesting to read. But as a fictional story, the only thing I can think about this book after this short story we're reading it was, okay. Like, there wasn't even really a, I wonder what's going to happen moment. It was just, okay, all the way through. There's no spookiness or terror to be had. There's no interest in the story. It honestly feels like he went on Reddit, found the story, rewrote it with his own characters, and put it out there. And it's just, like I said, it's just one of those, it's not interesting. Nothing interesting happens in either of these two stories. I'd give both of these a 4 out of 10. Not offensively bad in either, but there's really no point to reading them at all. Now we move on to the weirdest. Seriously, buckle up for this one. You guys are not ready for what's going to happen. This story is called The Celibate. This is the story that starts off rather solemnly. We meet our main character, Jeff Powers, and it honestly makes the most effective use of the clunky expositional intro. It starts off with him saying that he's a 39-year-old man and that he's a sex addict. And it comes off very much like an AA meeting. It's nice, simple. He talks about how much his addiction has affected him throughout his life, how he can't even really walk down the street and look at women without his addiction taking over and playing with his mind. He talks about the struggles that he's gone through trying to stay sober for 36 days. Eventually, a woman joins his Sex Addicts Anonymous group. Her name is Roxanne, and she's very clearly there to pick people up, not control herself. She starts to hit on our character, but he managed to push her off and get away from her. However, he goes to his niece's 18th birthday party a day afterwards, and he begins to realize that he's having very perverse thoughts when it comes to not only his brother's wife, but his recently turned 18-year-old niece. Horrified with himself and worried he's going to do something to hurt his family that he can't control, he gets in his car and speeds off, calling up Roxanne and breaking his celibacy. He feared so much that he was going to hurt his family by his addiction that he gave in to his addiction with someone else simply to keep them safe. And this ends with him in the shower crying as cold water washes over him, feeling utterly helpless in the face of his addiction. It's very solemn, very dour, very tragic. And then we cut to 8 months later. Jeff, with his newfound willpower from the dregs of his despair that we left him in last time, has been able to fight off the temptation and urge to have sex for almost a year now. Not since that night with Roxanne. And he's proud of himself. But he's beginning to notice something strange. Women are starting to come onto him more often and more aggressively as time goes on, the longer he keeps his celibacy. And the longer he goes, the angrier they seem to get whenever he turns them down. Almost to the point that they start having glowing red eyes. Then, one night, he's putting away the chairs for his sex addicts group. And a group of women bust in and demand that he does the horizontal hokey pokey with him. And that's when he realizes, by being celibate, he's been given the power to see beyond this veil that have been shrouding every woman. Oh my god, you guys really have no idea how hard it is to keep a straight face. He flees from this crowd, sprinting as he desperate to keep up his celibacy, going into a nearby church and seeking sanctuary, where he meets an old priest. This old priest who's taken his vows very seriously and tells him the truth of women. You see, men were once the dominant species on Earth. Yes, species, not gender, stick with me. They could reproduce asexually, but then one day, women arrived in their intergalactic vessels and touched down on the land. They took males, genetically rewriting them so they have to rely on women for reproduction purposes. And, oh my god. However, they genetically rewrote them and added something else in. You see, they rewrote men so that whenever they give in to that urge to reproduce with women, a primal fog goes over their brain and keeps them from evolving beyond a certain state, prevents them from getting too smart. This is all due to a long con plan where women will eventually outnumber men and be able to take over the earth and destroy men before moving on to the next planet and doing it again. The priest starts to get... Oh my god. The priest just starts to give a rousing speech talking about how enough men could resist the primal lusts and not give in to women's dark evil temptations, that maybe one day they'll all start to evolve into a good intelligence and be able to fight back against them, be able to beat women before they take over. But then the women break down the door, come in, cut the neck of the priest, throw him to the side, and proceed to gang up on our main character, Jeff Powers, and put him back into his primal state, with all that entails. It starts with an R word, but I'm not going into it because YouTube. They let him live, but only so long as he promises never to tell anyone what he learns, and has as many babies as he can. Oh my god. And our story ends with our character helpless and unable to resist the primal urge again, desperately trying to think of ways to get his people to evolve so they can fight back against the evil temptations of women and take their planet back. Oh my god. I only had one reaction the day I read this. This is what I did for the rest of the day. What did I just read? I honestly don't know what else to say about this one. I mean, I think I'm just going to let it speak for myself from here. But know this. This was a very strange and weird concept, but I could not help but laugh and enjoy myself during it. So, even though it gets a 4 out of 10, I state that it's just so weird, so bad that it's hilarious, and I highly recommend you download this anthology just to read that story. Oh my god. But that was Horror Quickies Volume 4 by Steve Hudgins. I hope you all enjoyed my review of it as much as I enjoyed the first story. And like I said a couple times before, this was no way an attack on Steve Hudgins. I'm sure he's a great guy in real life. This was merely a review of the stories he presented. And hopefully these critiques were constructive in the long run rather than just coming off as mocking. I do think there were a lot of great ideas in here, and I highly recommend Steve Hudgins continue to hone his craft. I just think he needs quite a bit of work before he starts making masterpieces. Until then, remember, with every book comes an adventure, and every adventure's worth having. Even the bad ones. And don't let them tell you what to do, man. Evolve past women's...